In a recent video with Pastor Mike Winger and Alyssa Childers, Mike compared hell to a parking ticket, grounding your children, and going to the dentist. The reason those analogies are incredibly flawed should be pretty obvious. When you get a parking ticket, the punishment is supposed to fit the crime. You disobeyed a law, whether intentionally or unintentionally, so you pay a fine. You don't have to suffer for it for the rest of your life, let alone all eternity. The same goes for grounding your children. The punishment is supposed to fit the crime. Maybe your son or daughter has spent too much time playing video games and not doing their homework, so you take the video games away until they get back on track. You don't beat them until they die, which is what a man named Brandon Reynolds did to his daughter when she refused to do her homework.
He said she didn't want to do her homework late last night and it, quote, triggered him. He says he started spanking her with a water shoe and then blacked out and didn't know what he was doing. People who live near the two are shocked.
Mike's dentist analogy goes like this. When you go to the dentist, they're causing you suffering, but they're not doing it simply for the sake of making you suffer. That's true, but it's also true that when you go to the dentist, the main goal is to reduce your long-term suffering. If you keep a tooth in your mouth that needs to be pulled, it can cause you a lot of pain and it can even kill you. However, with hell, the main goal is not to improve you in any way, it's to ensure that you suffer perpetually. Mike argues that hell is not torture because God is not causing your suffering simply for the sake of your suffering. Let's look at the definition of torture. It says the action or practice of inflicting severe pain or suffering on someone as a punishment or in order to force them to do or say something. Hell would definitely fall into the first category. There's not really much of a question of whether it's torture or not, or at least not when we go by what it generally means. In Bart Ehrman's latest book, Heaven and Hell, A History of the Afterlife, he refers to that interpretation of scripture as eternal torture. The real question here is whether eternal torture for all sins is a just punishment. In a video that Mike did covering the Ravi Zacharias scandal, he addressed the Christians who keep defending Ravi by saying that all sin is the same.
And others would say all sin is the same. All sin is the same. My sin, your sin, all of our sin is identical. And for that, I have literally, there's a video I'm going to put down below about all sin being the same. I don't think it's there yet. I'm sorry. And all sin is not the same. Not biblically, not at all. That is not a biblical teaching. All sin is, it brings death. That's true. All sin is horrible. That's absolutely true. All sin is the same. That's totally false. And it's a very dangerous perspective to have. If you want to tell me that wrongly suing the victim of my abuse is the same as me, like, I don't know, jaywalking, then you do not have a Christian worldview about sin.
It's clear that Mike agrees that not all sin is the same, so if that's the case, then why should there be a one-size-fits-all punishment? How is that just? A Christian will typically argue that God's ways are not our ways, or God sees sin differently, but if that's the case, then why do Christians also argue that God's law is written on our hearts? Why do they continually tell atheists that we borrow our sense of morality from God?